So today I'm going to be doing some cold casting with copper. Now I've jumped through a couple of steps already because I actually didn't decide to video until there a second ago. So I haven't got my thing to hold the phone steady, so you'll have to bear with me. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be cold casting this small medusa head. Okay, and I'm using this silicone mold to do so. I'm going to be cold casting this copper. This is copper powder, copper powder. Okay, so the idea of cold casting is that we get copper. Copper metal is actually suspended in a resin matrix. So for the resin, I have this Polycraft PU. It's polyurethane. This is a two-part mold. Sorry, it's a two-part resin. You mix the two parts together and then they set solid. So what I'm going to do, again, you need to bear with me because I haven't got anything to hold my phone, so I'm just doing this now on the fly. I'm going to tip the copper powder into this mold. It's real copper. Now, most people I see use bronze, not copper, but I didn't have bronze, so I'm going to use copper. I have bronze now, but I didn't at the time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to coat the inside of our mold with the copper powder. The idea being that that's close to the front, and when you pour the resin in, you'll have a very, very thin facer of copper, and that'll give the illusion that the whole thing is actually made of metal. So I'm just going to brush it into the detail. Now, this is important that you don't put too much of the copper powder into the detail, because what will happen is it'll stick in the folds of the mold, and it'll be left behind when you pull it out. What I mean by that is you'll get a small gap in your actual casting. Now, like I say, I'm doing this on the fly. I haven't really done much of this cold casting. Now brush it in there and brush it in there, and what happens there, where you see very close to the edge of the mold, is where our copper is going to be. And when it's poured out, then this will have a very thin layer of copper at the front of the mold, at the front of the piece. Okay, so maybe that's enough. I don't know. I have my little tin here for tipping out the excess. I'm going to tip the excess out in there. Again, I don't want too much of it to stick to the inside of the mold, because it won't. It'll leave parts behind. Now, so this is the two parts of the resin. What I've done already is I filled this with rice, and the volume of rice that it took to fill this, I've measured into these cups here. This was a step I should have explained, but I haven't got time, and I just didn't think of it. So this is, we'll call this part A. I'm going to do two things with part A. I have my polyurethane pigment, and I'm going to put a couple of drops into this. Not much, because as you can see, there's not much there. Put our lid back on. So that's gone in there, and I'm going to add copper powder. So this is, in effect, I'm making up a resin and copper mixture to go into the mold. Now it said in the ingredients to use a one-in-one mixture, so 1 part copper to the same part of the resin. I don't think I'm going to put quite so much in, because I don't have that much of it, and I'm still at the experimental stage with this particular techniques. So Okay, so I'm gonna leave that there as much as I'm going to use. I'm going to give it a stir. Now you can see the copper and the black paint are mixed together. So this being a two-part resin, we need to mix the two together. I'm not going to do them in one cup. So I'm going to pour. Now this sets really quickly, so I have to do it quickly. I have to mix the two parts quickly. I have to pour quickly. Okay, so that's the first part containing our metal. It goes in there. I think I got most of it. Now, and this is our hardener. Very quickly. Mix it up thoroughly. It will start to set very rapidly. 2 minutes. I just need to look around for my little, this is my little metal hanger. This is actual silver wire. So I'm going to pour this into the mold now. And when I'm making anything in a mold, I like to give it a shake to stop air bubbles being caught in undercuts. Okay, so in we go. I hope I measured out enough. Very, very close to it. Need to get the rest of that out of there real quickly. So I'm going to put it in, I'm going to push it in with my little stick here. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Now, there's my silver hanging device. And I'll put it in there at the top of the head. Now, I haven't got enough. It's just supposed to cover the ends there. This is really difficult trying to hold the phone. I'm going to have to put the phone down. Okay. Apologies for that. In fairness, anybody who ever watches these videos knows that I'm not known for my video skills. So I managed to tilt the mold slightly so that the resin flows towards the other end. I'm going to put my hanger in there. Give it a second. Should be starting to harden actually fairly quickly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hold it until it starts to harden up. Now, this is certainly not hardening as quickly as the last time I did this, and the reason is probably it's nowhere near as warm as it was. I mean, 4 or 5 weeks ago, we were in the middle of the summer. Now, it doesn't get very, very warm in Ireland. It certainly regularly gets to mid-20s, and I think it was that sort of level here in the workshop. So I mean, it certainly it made it harden a lot quicker. It's definitely colder now. Now it's starting to, yeah, it's definitely starting to harden. Okay, so I'm just going to hold that in place. You can see it's actually changing color. Okay, so the reason I'm holding the hanger clip up, because I don't want it to fall into the front of the mold and protrude through the face of our medusa chap. So I'll just, in true Blue Peter style, here's one I made earlier. This is a green lady. This is a green lady. You see the orange is actually the copper that's been poured to the front. Now this is going to, this is a waste because it's what I said earlier about the copper forming in, or pooling in the detail. This is what happened here. So some copper has pooled in the nose. When I pulled the cast, it left the copper behind. So it's not going to work. So anyway, this is just for demonstration purposes. I'm going to rub this with my very fine wire wool. Okay, so you can see the copper color coming out. See, what we've done is we've created a very thin layer of real copper at the front of the mold. You see the contrast here. This is the shiny copper, and the dull part where it was in the, before it was buffed up. So this is, although the particular cast is a bust because of the damage to the nose here, it's perfectly okay for purposes of illustration, as we say. Now, so what I can do when I have two hands free is I'm going to buff the rest of this, bring out the detail. But first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it some green paint. So I'll paint some green into the detail, because she's a green lady after all. And here's one I did earlier. That's what it should look like. Okay. Again, this has a bit of damage to the nose. These are going to be thrown. They're no use. I'm not going to sell them like that. So I've wiped some green paint around it, and it's worked its way into the leaves, and the copper has come through. What I did then was I threw some polyurethane varnish over to maintain the shine. Okay. You lose a slight bit of the burnish of the metal, but it doesn't matter. Now, if you look here, it's changing color rapidly as it's starting to set. This is just looking at this, it's a real pity about the nose there, but it's a learning process really, because all this is new to me. That's what it looks like at the back. It doesn't look very impressive because I didn't mix the copper in with the resin to any extent. I only put it at the front of the mold like I showed in the video. There's the green lady mold, goes in like that. So we're just watching the transformation, and would you believe that's hard already? There's two things happening there that are obvious to me. One is that it's curing and it's going hard, and second, it's releasing quite a lot of heat. I mean, almost too hot to touch. So obviously an exothermic reaction of some sort, which means that, and I noticed this before, I tried to pour resin, the two-part resin mixture, into a latex mold, and it delaminated the latex and it bubbled it up, and the heat ruined it. Now, I don't know if the mold was made correctly. It was one of these ones I got from a website in England that I think they're made by somebody who does it for a hobby. And it delaminated the latex and ruined the mold. So there's quite a bit of heat, going on here. It's almost too warm to touch. But yeah, okay, it's a little bit sticky. What it does is it cures from the thick areas, I think, from the thick areas outwards to the small areas. So the small areas are last to cure, which is, I suppose, the reverse of freezing of water, which happens the thin areas first and then works out to the thick areas. But anyway, never mind. We're dealing with different chemicals here. Okay, so just go back to our green lady here. Give that a polish, just to show you what the copper will actually look like when it's buffed up. You see, it actually comes up very bright. It's a pity about the damage to the nose, because the resin really captures the detail. It's very nice. It's hugely expensive, though, much more expensive than the Herculite or concrete or anything like that you might pour. But the results are very good. There's a finished one again with some damage to the nose. I'll just show another one. So this is also cold cast copper. This is a it was an experimental one, I have to say. It's not the detail. It's not done particularly well. If you see the boobies there are green, that's because the copper powder that was formed was too thin there. Okay, when I rubbed it, then the copper came away. So what I basically mean is, when you're buffing your copper molding, when you're buffing it to release the color of the copper, you have to be careful, because we're dealing with a very, very thin layer of copper there. And if you buff it too hard, you'll be looking at the resin underneath, which is what has happened there. You see? So it'll be that color underneath, and you rub the copper away. This also, I wouldn't have sold it, because there's a slight bubble in the chin. I made this weeks ago, and I never really got back to it, because I was never got back to the copper casting, because I was busy doing other things. But that's just an example anyway. So it's a trial and error, definitely trial and error. Like I say, this copper is expensive, and the resin is expensive. So I don't really like to see things that didn't turn out correctly, but that's just the way it is. Okay, so for example, those two green ladies now they're a waste.